What if the most powerful people in the Middle Ages weren't kings or knights, but cloistered women? What if their wisdom shaped kingdoms, their visions inspired millions, and their bravery defied expectations in the period spanning roughly 500 to 1500 AD? Number 5. Catherine of Siena. Siena, Italy, in the year 1347. The air in the bustling city was often filled with the clatter of artisans, the cries of street vendors, and the murmur of prayers from the many churches. But beneath this vibrant surface, a more ominous presence loomed: the Black Death, a terrifying plague that swept through Europe. In the midst of this turbulent time, on March 25th, Catherine Benincasa was born, one of perhaps 25 children to Jacopo and Lapa Benincasa. Her father was a prosperous dyer, a respected craftsman in the wool trade, and their home was a lively, crowded place. From a very young age, Catherine seemed to possess a spirit different from her siblings. She was drawn to solitude and prayer, often finding quiet corners away from the family's busy household to engage in spiritual contemplation. By the age of 6, Catherine reported experiencing her first profound mystical vision. She described seeing Christ seated in glory, accompanied by Peter, Paul, and John. This experience deeply impacted the young girl, cementing within her a powerful desire for a life dedicated entirely to God. Her family, however, held different expectations. As she grew into adolescence, her parents, particularly her mother Lapa, began to pressure her to consider marriage. They believed it was her duty to marry and have children, following the common path for women of her standing. They even attempted to make her more appealing to potential suitors, encouraging her to dress in finery and participate in social activities. Catherine, however, resisted. She had already made a private vow of virginity, committing herself to a spiritual path. Her refusal to conform led to considerable tension within the Benincasa household. Her parents, frustrated by her obstinacy, began to make her life more difficult. They stripped her of her small private room, forcing her to sleep and work with the servants. They assigned her the most arduous household chores, hoping that the drudgery would break her will and make her reconsider marriage. But Catherine remained steadfast. She viewed the increased workload not as a punishment, but as an opportunity for ascetic practice. She offered up her daily labors as a form of prayer, finding inner peace even amidst the physical demands. She would often perform her duties with a profound sense of spiritual joy, surprising those who observed her. Her perseverance eventually softened her family's resolve. At the age of 16, they relented, allowing her to pursue a more formalized religious life. However, Catherine did not enter a traditional cloistered convent. Instead, she sought admission to the Third Order of St. Dominic, a lay order known as the Mantellate. These women lived a consecrated life, wearing a habit and following a rule, but they did so within their own homes, not in a monastery. This was a remarkable choice, as the Mantellate typically accepted only older widows. Catherine, a young, unmarried woman, was an unusual candidate, but her profound piety and unwavering determination eventually convinced them. Upon joining the Mantellate, Catherine retreated into a period of intense solitude and prayer within her family home. For the next 3 years, she rarely left her room, except to attend Mass. Her daily life was characterized by extreme fasting, prolonged prayer, and very little sleep. She engaged in severe penitential practices, seeing them as a way to purify her soul and draw closer to God. During this time, she experienced a series of profound mystical phenomena. She described receiving vivid visions, spiritual ecstasies, and intimate communications with Christ. The most significant of these was what she called her mystical marriage to Christ, where she felt a deep, unbreakable bond with the divine. She described a ring, visible only to her, placed on her finger by Christ himself. Following this period of intense private spiritual growth, Catherine emerged from her solitude transformed. She believed she had received a divine command to re-enter the world and serve others, using her spiritual gifts for the benefit of all. Her focus shifted from personal salvation to active charity. She began to dedicate herself entirely to the poor and the sick, particularly those afflicted with the most dreaded diseases. She spent her days in the hospitals of Siena, caring for individuals suffering from leprosy and the plague, performing tasks that others shunned. She washed their wounds, changed their bandages, comforted the dying, and brought them food. Her compassion knew no bounds, and she often faced criticism and disgust from those who did not understand her radical commitment. As she engaged in these acts of mercy, her spiritual authority grew. People from all walks of life began to seek her out: the desperate, the afflicted, the penitent, and even those in positions of power. She spoke with a directness and passion that captivated her listeners, offering spiritual guidance, advice, and exhortation. She spoke of the importance of love, charity, and repentance. A community of disciples, both men and women, began to gather around her, drawn by her extraordinary charisma and unwavering devotion. They became known as her family, or Canonized, and traveled with her, supporting her mission. Among them were priests who acted as her confessors and secretaries, recording her words as she dictated. Catherine's influence soon extended far beyond the sickbeds of Siena. She became a prolific letter writer, dictating hundreds of letters to her secretaries. These letters, over 300 of which still survive, were addressed to an astonishing array of people: popes, kings, queens, cardinals, civic leaders, condemned prisoners, scholars, and ordinary citizens. Her correspondence reveals her deep involvement in the social and political issues of her day. She fearlessly urged peace among the warring city-states of Italy, condemning violence and corruption. She often acted as a mediator, traveling between cities to broker agreements and reconcile factions. Her appeals for justice and mercy were delivered with a powerful spiritual authority, even to those who held immense worldly power. Her most famous and audacious mission began in 1376. For nearly 70 years, the papacy had been based in Avignon, France, rather than in Rome. This period, known as the Avignon papacy, was viewed by many, including Catherine, as a spiritual scandal and a source of division within the Church. She believed strongly that the Pope, as the spiritual leader of the Universal Church, belonged in Rome, the traditional seat of Peter. She was convinced that God himself willed the return of the papacy to Italy. Despite being a laywoman with no formal political standing, Catherine embarked on a journey to Avignon to confront Pope Gregory XI directly. The journey was long and arduous. Upon her arrival in Avignon, a place known for its worldly splendor and political intrigue, Catherine stood out. She was a small woman dressed in the simple habit of the mantelet, yet her presence commanded attention. She met with Pope Gregory XI, a man who, despite his position, was reportedly hesitant and indecisive. Catherine did not mince words. She spoke to him with a remarkable blend of reverence and directness, urging him to fulfill his duty to God and the Church. She reminded him of his sacred vow to return to Rome, and passionately articulated the spiritual decay and suffering that resulted from his absence. She spoke of the need for church reform and the healing of divisions. Historical accounts describe the power of her arguments and the strength of her conviction. She challenged him to be a true shepherd, not merely a political figure. Her unwavering faith and spiritual authority reportedly had a profound impact on the Pope. He listened to her, even when she spoke uncomfortable truths. After a series of meetings, and despite strong opposition from the French cardinals and his own family, Pope Gregory XI made the momentous decision to return to Rome in 1377. This was a triumph for Catherine, seen by many as a direct result of her fearless advocacy and spiritual influence. She had achieved what many powerful political figures and church officials had failed to do for decades. However, the return to Rome did not usher in an era of peace. Shortly after Pope Gregory XI's death in 1378, a new crisis erupted: the Great Western Schism. Two rival popes were elected, one in Rome and one in Avignon, throwing the entire church into chaos and division. This schism deeply grieved Catherine, who had worked tirelessly for church unity. She threw herself into supporting the Roman Pope, Urban VI, believing him to be the legitimate pontiff. She dedicated her remaining years to healing the schism, writing more letters, advising Urban VI, and trying to persuade disaffected cardinals and rulers to acknowledge the Roman Pope. She traveled to Rome, living near St. Peter's Basilica, where she continued her spiritual work and advised on church matters. During this intense period, Catherine also dictated her most famous work, the Dialogue of Divine Providence, often simply called the Dialogue. This book, dictated during a state of ecstasy, is a profound spiritual treatise, recording conversations she believed she had with God the Father. It explores themes of divine providence, spiritual purification, the nature of sin, and the path to true virtue and love. The dialogue became a foundational text in Christian mysticism and theology, praising her deep understanding of spiritual truths. Catherine's relentless work, constant fasting, and severe penances took a heavy toll on her physical health. By 1380, at the age of only 33, her body was ravaged by exhaustion and illness. She died in Rome on April 29, 1380, surrounded by her disciples. Her final words reportedly expressed her joy and readiness to meet her Creator. Her life, though short, left an indelible mark on the Church and the course of European history. Her extraordinary commitment to Christ, her fearless pursuit of justice, and her profound spiritual wisdom cemented her legacy as one of the most remarkable women of the Middle Ages. Number 4. Bridget of Sweden. Long before Catherine of Siena was urging popes to return to Rome, another extraordinary woman, Bridget of Sweden, was already shaking up the medieval world with her visions and political boldness. Born in Finstad, Sweden, around the year 1303, Bridget was the daughter of Birger Persson, a wealthy and influential landowner and provincial judge. Her family was deeply religious and aristocratic, part of Sweden's most prominent noble lineage. From an early age, Bridget displayed a profound spirituality. She was only 7 years old when she reported her first mystical vision, a vivid dream of the Virgin Mary crowning her. 2 years later, she described a vision of Christ on the cross, an image that deeply affected her and remained a central theme throughout her life. Despite her fervent spiritual inclinations, Bridget's life initially followed the expected path for a noblewoman of her time. At the age of 14, she was arranged to marry Ulf Gudmarsson, a devout and kind nobleman, Lord of Ulvesa. Their marriage was a partnership that lasted for 28 years and was remarkably fruitful. Together, they had 8 children, 4 sons and 4 daughters, many of whom went on to hold important positions in Swedish society. Their household at Ulvasa was known for its piety and charitable works. Bridget and Ulf lived a life of devout practice, often hosting pilgrims and caring for the poor and the sick on their estate. They both joined the Third Order of St. Francis, a lay order that allowed them to live a consecrated life within their marriage and family responsibilities. They even made a pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela in Spain, a demanding journey that highlighted their shared faith. In 1344, after their pilgrimage and having raised their children, Ulf fell ill and died. Bridget was now a widow in her early 40s. While grief-stricken, Ulf's death marked a significant turning point in Bridget's life. She interpreted it as a divine sign to fully dedicate herself to a spiritual path. She gave away most of her possessions, leaving behind the comforts of noble life, and moved to a small house near the Cistercian monastery of Alvastra. Here, she began to live a life of strict asceticism, prayer, and penance. It was during this period that her mystical experiences intensified and became more frequent and detailed. Bridget began to receive what she called revelations, powerful and extensive messages that she believed came directly from Christ, the Virgin Mary, and various saints. These revelations covered a vast range of topics: prophecies about the future, stern critiques of the moral decay of the Church and society, detailed instructions for spiritual life, and even specific political advice. She dictated these revelations to her confessors, who translated them from her native Swedish into Latin. These revelations would eventually fill 8 volumes and became her most famous literary contribution. Her visions were not merely private spiritual experiences. They often contained directives for action, and Bridget, driven by what she believed was divine command, did not hesitate to act upon them. One of the most significant revelations was the instruction to found a new religious order. This new order, to be known as the Order of the Most Holy Savior, or the Bridgetines, was to be unique. It was to be a double monastery with separate quarters for monks and nuns, but with a shared church and a common superior who was always to be the abbess. The order's rule emphasized devotion to the Passion of Christ, study, and manual labor. Bridget began the work of establishing the mother house for this new order in Vadstena, Sweden, on land gifted to her by King Magnus IV. Bridget's revelations also frequently included strong criticisms of the powerful, particularly the Pope, whom she, like Catherine of Siena, urged to return to Rome from Avignon. She also criticized the worldly lives of the clergy and the corruption she perceived within the Church and among secular rulers. She felt a divine mandate to convey these messages directly, regardless of the person's status. She was not afraid to speak truth to power, often delivering harsh divine warnings to kings and popes who she believed had strayed from righteous paths. In 1349, feeling a strong divine call, Bridget decided to leave Sweden and travel to Rome. Her primary purpose was to gain papal approval for her new religious order, but she also felt compelled to be present in the spiritual heart of the Church and to continue her mission of reform. She intended to stay in Rome only for the Holy Year of 1350, but she would end up remaining there for the rest of her life, a period of 23 years. Rome in the mid-14th century was far from the glorious capital she might have envisioned. It was a city in decline, neglected due to the absence of the popes in Avignon, plagued by poverty, crime, and dilapidated buildings. Bridget immersed herself in Roman life, continuing her work of charity, caring for the sick, and ministering to the poor. She lived a simple, austere life, often undertaking pilgrimages to various shrines and basilicas in the city. Her home in Rome became a gathering place for Swedes and other pilgrims, and her reputation for holiness and prophetic insight grew. She continued to receive revelations, many of which focused on the spiritual state of Rome and the need for the Pope's return. She sent messengers and letters to the popes in Avignon, forcefully articulating her divine mandates for their return to Rome and for fundamental church reform. Her persistent advocacy, fueled by her powerful visions, became a significant voice in the growing chorus of calls for the Avignon papacy to end. While Pope Gregory XI's eventual return to Rome happened after Bridget's death, her tireless efforts and prophetic warnings certainly contributed to the pressure that ultimately led to that decision. She often faced skepticism and opposition, with some dismissing her as a deluded visionary. Yet her unwavering conviction and the clear spiritual nature of her message resonated with many. Bridget's spiritual journey was not limited to Rome. She undertook extensive pilgrimages to various holy sites, including Assisi, Naples, and the Holy Land. In 1371, at the age of 68, she embarked on a perilous pilgrimage to Jerusalem. This was an incredibly dangerous and physically demanding journey for anyone, let alone an elderly woman. She visited the places associated with Christ's life and passion, experiences that deeply enriched her spiritual life and fueled further revelations. Her revelations contain vivid descriptions of these sacred sites and her profound experiences there. She returned to Rome in 1372, exhausted from her journey. Her health rapidly declined. Bridget of Sweden died in Rome on July 23, 1373. Her body was initially buried in Rome, but later, in accordance with her wishes, it was transported back to Sweden and interred in the mother house of her Brigittine order at Vadstena, which by then was well established and thriving. Although papal approval for her order only came definitively after her death, her vision for the Brigittines continued to flourish, becoming a significant monastic movement in Northern Europe. Her revelations were widely disseminated and influenced spiritual thought for centuries, even though some aspects were met with initial suspicion by church authorities, who had to verify their orthodoxy. Her extraordinary life, marked by intense spiritual experiences, political involvement, and the founding of a new religious order, left an indelible mark on both the Church and the history of medieval Europe. Number 3. Gertrude the Great. Before Bridget of Sweden was receiving divine revelations and influencing popes, and long before Catherine of Siena was urging the return of the papacy to Rome, another powerful spiritual figure, Gertrude the Great, was living an extraordinary life within the walls of a medieval monastery. Born in Thuringia, Germany, in 1256, Gertrude's early life is somewhat of a mystery. Tender age of 5, she was placed as a child oblate in the Cistercian monastery of Helfta, a renowned center of learning and spiritual life for women in Saxony. It is unclear whether she was an orphan or if her parents placed her there for her education and spiritual formation. Whatever the circumstances, Helfta became her lifelong home. The monastery of Helfta was not an ordinary convent. It was a vibrant intellectual and mystical hub, fostering a rich environment of learning, scholarship, and profound spiritual experiences. The Abbess Gertrude of Hackeborn was a wise and nurturing leader, and her sister Mechthild of Hackeborn was herself a renowned mystic and musician. Gertrude grew up in this stimulating atmosphere. She was an exceptionally bright student, excelling in her studies. She became proficient in Latin, the language of scholarship and liturgy, and immersed herself in the liberal arts, history, and classical literature. She developed a keen intellect and a deep love for books, spending many hours in the monastery library. Her early life was characterized by intense academic pursuit, and she initially focused more on intellectual achievements than on mystical experiences. However, a profound transformation occurred in Gertrude's life in January 1281, when she was 25 years old. She described this as a conversion experience, a moment of profound spiritual awakening. Until then, she had been engrossed in secular learning, finding her joy primarily in intellectual pursuits. But on that day, she experienced a series of visions and interior illuminations that shifted her focus entirely to divine study and mystical contemplation. She began to dedicate herself to the study of Scripture, the writings of the Church Fathers, and the spiritual life with renewed fervor. This turning point marked the beginning of her profound mystical journey. Following this conversion, Gertrude began to experience extraordinary visions and spiritual revelations with increasing frequency. She described intimate conversations with Christ, profound insights into the mysteries of faith, and vivid symbolic imagery. These experiences were not fleeting emotions. They were deeply structured and intellectually coherent. She meticulously recorded these revelations, sometimes directly, sometimes through her companions in her most important work, the Herald of Divine Love, also known as the Spiritual Exercises. This work is a testament to her profound spiritual life and her articulate expression of mystical theology. The Herald of Divine Love is not simply a collection of visions. It is a rich tapestry of prayers, meditations, and detailed descriptions of her interior life. In these writings, Gertrude articulates a unique form of mysticism centered on the Sacred Heart of Jesus. While devotion to the Sacred Heart was known before her, Gertrude's writings significantly deepened and popularized this devotion. She described Christ's heart as a fount of divine love, compassion, and mercy. A place of intimate union for the soul, she presented vivid imagery of her own heart being exchanged with Christ's, or of drinking from the wound in his side. These are not mere poetic metaphors. Gertrude experienced them as profound spiritual realities. Her descriptions are strikingly personal and intimate, reflecting a direct and tender relationship with Christ. She wrote of receiving spiritual gifts, spiritual nourishment, and even specific instructions from Christ himself. For example, she described moments where she was invited to rest her head on Christ's breast, listening to the beat of his heart, or being given a spiritual drink from the chalice of his love. These accounts are filled with rich theological insights, demonstrating how her intellectual rigor intertwined with her profound spiritual experiences. She also detailed her spiritual struggles, her moments of doubt, and her journey towards deeper faith, making her writings relatable to others seeking spiritual growth. Beyond her personal revelations, Gertrude also developed a deep theological understanding of the liturgy and the sacraments, particularly the Eucharist. She saw the Mass as a powerful encounter with Christ's sacrifice and presence. Her writings contain extensive reflections on how to participate more fully in the liturgy, emphasizing active and heartfelt engagement rather than mere passive observation. She also wrote prayers and hymns that captured her profound devotion and were used by her fellow nuns. Despite her intense mystical life, Gertrude was not detached from the practical realities of her monastery. She was a valuable member of the community, serving in various capacities. Her linguistic skills, particularly her mastery of Latin, made her indispensable. She often assisted in the monastery's scriptorium, copying and illuminating manuscripts. She likely also taught some of the younger nuns and novices, sharing her vast knowledge of scripture and spiritual texts. She was known for her kindness, humility, and willingness to serve her sisters, demonstrating that her profound spiritual experiences did not lead to arrogance or isolation, but to greater charity and service. Gertrude also engaged in intercessory prayer for others, praying for the souls in purgatory, for the conversion of sinners, and for the needs of the living. She believed that her prayers and spiritual offerings had a real impact on the world, a concept central to medieval Christian belief. Her writings are filled with instances where she described praying for specific individuals or situations and receiving divine assurance that her prayers were heard. Her final major work, the Book of Special Grace, was largely a collaboration with her fellow nuns, particularly Mechthild of Magdeburg and Mechthild of Hackeborn, chronicled the mystical experiences and spiritual insights of the Helfta community, demonstrating the rich spiritual environment that flourished there. Gertrude's contributions to this work highlight her collaborative spirit and her recognition of the shared spiritual journey of her community. Gertrude the Great died in 1302, having spent nearly her entire life within the walls of Helfta. Her writings, particularly the Herald of Divine Love, were widely circulated, especially in the Low Countries and Germany, and significantly influenced the development of Christian mysticism. Her emphasis on the Sacred Heart became a cornerstone of devotion in later centuries. She is remembered not only for her extraordinary mystical experiences, but also for her intellectual gifts, her profound theological insights, and her ability to articulate the deepest mysteries of faith in a compelling and accessible way. Her life showed that intense spiritual contemplation could coexist with rigorous intellectual pursuit and humble service within a monastic community, making her a truly extraordinary figure of the medieval period. Number 2. Clare of Assisi. In the bustling, sun-drenched town of Assisi, Italy, in 1194, a girl named Clare was born into the wealthy and influential noble family of Offreduccio. Her father, Favarone, was a count, and her mother, Ortolana, was a devout woman who had made pilgrimages to Rome and the Holy Land. Clare grew up in a fortified palace on the edge of Assisi, amidst the comforts and privileges of her noble status. From an early age, she was known for her beauty and her piety. Despite her family's social standing and the expectation that she would make an advantageous marriage, Clare felt a growing spiritual yearning that set her apart. She secretly gave alms to the poor and engaged in practices of self-denial, finding solace in prayer rather than in the social whirl of aristocratic life. Assisi at this time was also home to a young man named Francis, who, after a dramatic conversion experience, had renounced his family's wealth and dedicated himself to a radical life of poverty and service to God. Francis and his small band of followers, who would become known as the Friars Minor, were making a profound impact on the local community with their unconventional way of life, preaching and acts of charity. Clare, from her palace window, observed Francis and his companions. She was captivated by their message of radical poverty, humility, and devotion to Christ, seeing in it a path to spiritual fulfillment that resonated deeply with her own desires. Clare began to secretly seek out Francis for spiritual guidance. Their meetings were discreet, often under the cloak of night, as her family would have strongly opposed any association with a man who had so dramatically rejected social norms and wealth. Francis recognized in Clare a kindred spirit, a soul truly seeking God with unwavering determination. He encouraged her in her spiritual journey, though he did not immediately suggest she join his fledgling order. He knew the path he followed was not one for women in the same way as his friars traveled and preached. On the night of Palm Sunday, March 18, 1212, Clare made a momentous decision that would alter the course of her life forever. Accompanied by her Aunt Bianca, she secretly slipped out of her family home. She bypassed the guards and scaled the walls of the palace, a testament to her resolute determination. She made her way to the small chapel of Santa Maria degli Angeli, known as the Porci Oncola, where Francis and his friars were gathered. There, in a symbolic and deeply spiritual ceremony, Francis cut off her long aristocratic hair, signifying her renunciation of the world and her commitment to a consecrated life. She exchanged her rich garments for a simple, coarse habit. This dramatic act was a public declaration of her intention to live a life of poverty, following the example of Francis. Francis initially placed Clare in a Benedictine convent, as there was no established community for women living such a radical life of poverty. However, her family, upon discovering her departure, was furious. Her uncle Monaldo, along with other relatives, attempted to forcibly remove her from the convent, dragging her by her hair, determined to bring her back to her former life. Clare, however, clung to the altar, resisting with all her strength, revealing her shorn hair as a sign of her irrevocable vow. Her unwavering determination eventually forced them to retreat. Soon after, Francis found a small, dilapidated church and dwelling next to the chapel of San Damiano, which he had helped rebuild. This humble dwelling became the first home for Clare and the small community of women who began to join her. Her younger sister Agnes also defied her family to join Clare, followed by other noble women from Assisi and beyond, all drawn by Clare's spiritual vision and the radical path of poverty she embraced. This community became known as the Poor Ladies of San Damiano, later becoming the Order of St. Clare or the Poor Clares. Clare became the abbess of the community at San Damiano, guiding her sisters in a life of extreme poverty, prayer, and manual labor. Unlike other monastic orders for women, which often relied on endowments and possessions, Clare insisted that her community live entirely without property, relying solely on alms and the generosity of others. This was a radical departure from a norm for women's religious orders, and it presented significant challenges. She understood Francis's vision of absolute poverty as a path to spiritual freedom, mirroring Christ's own humble life. The concept of Lady Poverty was central to Clare's spirituality. She lived it literally, enduring harsh conditions, often going without adequate food, clothing, or heat. She performed the most menial tasks, caring for the sick, sweeping and begging for food alongside her sisters. Her life was a living testament to her conviction that true wealth lay not in material possessions, but in spiritual riches and complete dependence on God. This radical embrace of poverty, however, was not without its struggles. For many years, Clare fought tirelessly to maintain the privilege of poverty, the right for her order to own no communal property, and to live entirely on alms. Church authorities, accustomed to established monastic practices and concerned about the financial stability of the convent, repeatedly tried to impose a rule that would allow the Poor Clares to hold property. She appealed to popes, cardinals, and local bishops, articulating her vision with unwavering conviction. She believed that absolute poverty was an essential element of her spiritual calling and the unique charism of her order given to her by Francis. She wrote letters and sent messengers, making her case with remarkable eloquence and spiritual authority. Despite her delicate health and frequent illnesses, Clare's spirit remained strong. She ruled her community with kindness and firm resolve, earning the deep respect and love of her sisters. She encouraged them in their spiritual growth, their communal life, and their shared commitment to poverty. Her days were filled with prayer, work, and advising her sisters. She was known for her deep compassion and her ability to inspire devotion in others. Perhaps the most famous story illustrating Clare's spiritual strength and unwavering faith occurred in 1240. The town of Assisi was threatened by invading Saracen mercenaries, who were in the service of the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II. These soldiers were known for their brutality. As the mercenaries approached the convent of San Damiano, prepared to attack Clare, who was gravely ill and bedridden, reportedly had herself carried to the convent gate. There, holding a monstrance containing the Blessed Sacrament, she faced the invaders. According to historical accounts, she prayed with fervent determination, asking God to protect her sisters. As she did so, the soldiers, for reasons unknown, retreated, abandoning their assault on the convent. This event, known as the Miracle of the Saracens, solidified her reputation as a woman of immense faith and divine protection. Clare's commitment to her vow of poverty endured until her last breath. In 1253, as she lay dying, Pope Innocent IV personally visited her at San Damiano. She had spent decades fighting for the official papal approval of her rule, which enshrined the privilege of poverty. Just 2 days before her death, her rule, uniquely embracing radical poverty for a women's order, received its official papal bull. This was the culmination of her life's work, a testament to her perseverance and the strength of her spiritual vision. Clare of Assisi died on August 11th, 1253, at San Damiano, the place where her order was born and where she had lived for over 40 years. Her life was a testament to the power of unwavering faith, radical simplicity, and profound devotion. She demonstrated that a woman, even confined to a cloister, could wield immense spiritual and moral authority. shaping not only a religious order, but also influencing the very understanding of religious life in the medieval church. She became a model of Christian poverty and an inspiration for countless men and women who sought a deeper, more authentic spiritual path. Number 1. Hildegard of Bingen. In the year 1098, in Bermersheim-Vorderhohe, a small village in present-day Germany, Hildegard was born into a noble family, the 10th child of Hildebert and Mechthild. From a very young age, Hildegard experienced what she described as visions of divine light and sound. She would later say that she saw the living light and understood the meaning of Scripture and other complex subjects in a way that was beyond her natural abilities. These experiences were not fleeting. They were a constant part of her life from the age of 3. However, she kept these experiences secret for many years, fearing misunderstanding or ridicule. At the age of 8, as was common practice for noble families, Hildegard was entrusted to the care of Jutta of Sponheim, an anchoress living a solitary enclosed life in a small cell attached to the Benedictine monastery of Disibodenberg. Jutta was a devout and educated noblewoman, and she became Hildegard's mentor and spiritual guide. Under Jutta's tutelage, Hildegard learned to read and write, to chant the Psalms, and to understand the Benedictine rule. She absorbed knowledge of Latin, Scripture, and monastic life. This early monastic education provided the foundation for her extraordinary intellectual and spiritual development. As Hildegard grew older, other women joined Jutta, forming a small community of nuns around her. When Jutta died in 1136, the nuns unanimously elected Hildegard as their new abbess, despite her initial reluctance due to her perceived unworthiness and her continued secret visions. At 38 years old, Hildegard was now responsible for the spiritual and practical well-being of her community. Around this time, Hildegard began to experience a profound shift in her mystical visions. She described receiving a direct divine command to write down everything she saw and heard, to share her revelations with the world. This was a daunting task for a cloistered nun in the 12th century, especially given the skepticism and suspicion often directed at women who claimed spiritual authority. However, she felt compelled to obey what she believed was God's will. She sought the advice of her confessor Volmar, who became her lifelong secretary and confidant, and a local abbot, Kuno. They encouraged her to write, and word of her visions eventually reached the Archbishop of Mainz, who in turn informed Pope Eugenius III. Pope, attending a synod in Trier in 1147 to 1148, heard about Hildegard's visions. He sent a commission to investigate her claims. After reviewing her writings, particularly her first major theological work, Scivias, meaning Know the Ways of the Lord, the Pope declared them to be of divine inspiration. This papal endorsement was a monumental turning point. It provided Hildegard with official church approval, giving her an unprecedented authority and legitimacy for a woman of her time. From then on, she was no longer merely a local abbess, but a recognized spiritual authority whose words carried immense weight. With papal approval, Hildegard's creative and intellectual energies exploded. Scivias is a sprawling work filled with vivid descriptions of 26 visions, offering deep theological insights into creation, redemption, the church, and the end times. She depicted these visions with rich symbolic imagery, often including detailed illustrations that she supervised. These images themselves are works of art, interpreting the complex narratives of her spiritual experiences. Hildegard's interests and talents extended far beyond theology and mysticism. She was a prolific writer, composer, and natural scientist. She penned 2 major scientific and medical works, a Physica, also known as Liber Subtilitatem Biversarum Naturarum Creaturum, which describes the natural world and its properties, and Causae et Curae, or Liber Compositae Medicinae, a treatise on human health, diseases, and their treatments, drawing on her observations, diseases, and their treatments. These works are remarkable for their detailed descriptions and demonstrate her keen powers of observation and empirical thinking, even within a spiritual framework. She described various herbs, their medicinal uses, and even recommended practical remedies for different ailments, treating a holistic view of health that integrated body, mind, and spirit. Her artistic talents were equally extraordinary. Hildegard composed a large body of liturgical music, collected in a work called Symphonia Harmoniae Caelestium Revelation, Symphony of the Harmony of Heavenly Revelations. Her music, primarily monophonic chants, is highly original and expressive, marked by wide vocal ranges and soaring melodies that reflect her mystical experiences. She created her own language, known as lingua ignota, unknown language, a secret vocabulary of over 1,000 words, possibly intended for a mystical purpose or as a means of secret communication within her community. As her fame grew, Hildegard felt the need for her community to have a greater degree of independence. The monastery at Disibodenberg, a male monastery, exercised authority over the nuns. Hildegard, believing she received another divine command, sought to move her convent to a new, independent location. This decision faced strong opposition from the abbot and monks at Disibodenberg, who did not want to lose the prestige and financial contributions associated with Hildegard and her growing community. Despite intense pressure, Hildegard remained steadfast. She even became gravely ill, describing her sickness as a divine punishment for her hesitation to follow God's will. She only recovered when the abbot finally gave in. In 1150, Hildegard, along with about 20 nuns, moved to a new site on the Rupertsberg, a hill near Bingen on the Rhine River. Here she established her own independent monastery, which she governed as abbess. This move was a significant achievement, demonstrating her administrative skill, her unwavering determination, and her ability to assert her authority in a male-dominated world. The Rupertsberg monastery flourished under her leadership, attracting more novices and becoming a vibrant center of learning and spiritual life. From her new independent base, Hildegard's influence continued to expand. She began to travel, undertaking 4 major preaching tours between 1158 and 1170. This was highly unusual for a cloistered nun, but her papal authorization and unique prophetic status allowed her to break norms. She preached in public to both clergy and laity in various German cities, including Mainz, Cologne, Trier, and Würzburg. Her sermons were powerful and direct, often criticizing the moral failings of the clergy and calling for reform within the church. She delivered her messages with passion and conviction, often speaking on behalf of what she believed was the voice of God. Her charisma and intellectual prowess captivated her audiences, and she was widely sought after for advice and spiritual guidance. Hildegard also engaged in extensive correspondence, writing letters to popes, emperors, kings, abbots, abbesses, and ordinary people. Her letters reveal her sharp intellect, her deep spiritual insights, and her willingness to offer counsel, warnings, and encouragement to the most powerful figures of her time. She did not shy away from confronting emperors like Frederick I Barbarossa when she believed they were straying from righteous paths. Her letters served as a powerful medium for her influence, reaching individuals and institutions across Europe. Towards the end of her life, Hildegard faced challenges, including an interdict imposed on her monastery by the clergy of Mainz, due to a dispute over the burial of a young nobleman. This meant the nuns could not receive sacraments or chant the divine office. Hildegard, with remarkable courage, fought against this decision, writing letters and appealing to higher authorities. She meticulously documented the injustice and argued for her community's innocence. Eventually, the interdict was lifted shortly before her death, a testament to her resilience and the respect she commanded. Hildegard of Bingen died on September 17, 1179, at the age of 81. Her life was a testament to extraordinary spiritual insight, intellectual brilliance, artistic creativity, and immense courage. She navigated a complex medieval world, breaking through societal and gender barriers to become a powerful voice of reform, a celebrated visionary, a respected scholar, and a groundbreaking composer. Her legacy as Sibyl of the Rhine continues to inspire and intrigue scholars and spiritual seekers alike, cementing her place as one of the most remarkable figures of the entire medieval period.